Today the train is leaving the station for the first time in a long time because the chicken train is coming back to this bed. Stay tuned for that in this video coming up. It's been a while since the chicken train's been in a video, and I'll tell you why. Because the chicken train hasn't been in rotation for a while. The chickens have been hanging out in the corral up top while I've been getting all the tomatoes set, while I've been building retaining walls down here and getting cover crops to grow. And I've had endless, or what seems like endless, problems with gophers in these cover crops. So finally this bed here, I'm just saying, I give up. Here's one of the reasons why I'm putting the chickens in this bed right now. This area doesn't have a cover crop on it, but it did. The gophers have came in here and caused havoc, and I'm just sick of fighting them. So at this point, what I'm gonna do is cut my losses, put the chickens in here, and move on to the next step. But this is it, and I'll show you the back of the bed here and what that looks like. The back of the bed looks pretty good. It's mostly fava beans. There's some ryegrass in here. Overall, it's not the best bed. I'm sick of tying up space with it, so it's time to move on. Given that this is the first time that I'll be installing the chicken train in this new permanent bed system, I don't really know how it's going to work with pathways and widths. So the first thing I'm going to do is go behind me and make sure I prune and train up all the tomatoes in this general area, because that'll give me a week or so before I have to go back and do it again. What I don't want to do is put the train in place and then find out I don't have enough room, so I'm trying to think ahead here and think what problems could be caused. Let me do as much of those problem solving as I can in the foreground. Tomatoes are now all pruned. All the prunings went into the run. I'll leave those for the chickens. Why I did this is to save myself having to operate in here when I put the chicken train in. These beds are 24 inches wide. The chicken train is about 28 to 30 inches wide. So it's gonna go into the pathways. I don't know how precocious it's gonna be to operate in the pathways, so I wanted to make sure I didn't have to operate in the pathways right now, at least for the first time. So that's why I pruned them ahead of time. The next step I'm gonna do is something I normally wouldn't do or haven't done before, but I'm going to take a normal spade and I'm going to go right along the edge of the bed and the pathways and slice down at an angle, kind of going into the pathway as I go deeper, because what I want to try and encourage the chickens to do is dig down as much as they can. And my thought is, by putting a hard, clean cut here and loosening up the soil a little bit, it'll make their job a little easier. So I'm just going right on the edge of the pathway, pushing in, and I'll pull back. And I'll just do this down the whole line. There, now I've delineated the border of the bed with the spade. Actually harder than I thought. Some of that subsoil is pretty hard, but I'm hoping that it'll encourage the chickens to dig down, because the next step I want to do actually in this bed is double dig it. Video on that coming up. But before we get there, let's get the chicken train on, and that's where we go right now. Looking at this now, I'm glad I pruned these tomatoes ahead of time, because this walkway in there, it's tight. At this section of the garden, there's only 6-inch pathways, 24-inch beds, 6-inch pathways. So with the chicken tractor taking up 2 or 3 inches of that pathway, you're left with 3 inches of the pathway. By the time the tomatoes hang out into the pathway, it's tight. It's tight. Maybe for my 5-year-old daughter, she could do it. But for me, I'm gonna be moving tomatoes, trying to fit through there. Here we have a lady going to town in the pathway where she's not supposed to be. She should be inside the train. But this is dark soil here. This is some of the best soil I have in the garden are in these 2 or 3 short beds. So as you'll see in a follow-up video where I dig deeper into this bed, we'll get a look at what the soil actually looks like. But just seeing it here, you can see how black it is, because the chickens have been in here since day one, and a lot of compost has been put in here over time. The chicken train, it's working again. Overall looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it looks in the system. First time it's ever been in there. With the 6-inch pathways, it's definitely tight on both sides. It seems to be sitting pretty flat. as it straddles the bed with the feet of the train or on either side on the pathways. That seems to be pretty good in terms of not having gaps in there where the chickens could go under. We'll see how it all works out. I'm not sure how this slicing I did with the spade is going to help, if it's going to encourage them to dig down at the bed pathway border, which is what I want. I don't want them tearing up the pathway too much. I'd rather have them dig down at that little crease I made, which is why I put it there. Now, there wasn't a ton of cover crop in here, but that's the point. I'm putting the chickens in here at this point to get them out of this bed. 2 beds over, I actually have another full row of cover crop that looks okay. It's better than this bed, but also a lot of gopher damage, and the ryegrass in that bed up there is going to seed. So after about a week, I'm gonna have the chickens out of this bed and move them up to that bed to clean it out. And then I'll take the next step of playing around with this bed, because I wanna try some different things, one of which is double digging, which you'll see coming up. So having the chickens come through, nuke this first, then when I go to do the double dig, I'll incorporate all the biomass that they left behind, all their manure, into the double dig process. So I hope it'll turn out, hoping it'll turn out okay. One initial concern I have, and I'm not sure if this is valid or not, is will the chickens kick up a bunch of soil onto the tomato plants, thereby increasing the chances of blight? Normally, a lot of that soil would never touch the leaves of the tomato plant because it's just not blowing up that way. It's not splashing up there, nothing's kicking it up there, the wind's not blowing it up there. So if there's blight spores or disease in that soil, there's a chance the chickens being in here doing their little digging could kick it up onto the foliage, possibly contributing to disease. Is that valid? I don't really know. Here's the following morning. What it looks like, the chickens have not touched it today. So they've done a good job of knocking it all down to the ground, trampling it. I'll leave them in here for another week to tear it all up. You can start to see what that soil's looking like under there, which looks really good. But here's the rest of the run. 1 day's worth of beneficial damage. Here's what we have 1 week later. They haven't been in here every day because they happened to get out when I was out of town. And my wife sealed off the run to prevent them getting out again. Where they ended up getting out was actually right in here. They're digging and tunneling along the edge of the pathway where that previous chicken was digging, where she was not supposed to. So that was the vulnerable spot along these edges. But overall, the systems worked well. They've completely taken down that vegetation. One thing I did end up changing on the design was the construction of the tunnel itself, the chicken tunnel. This is a piece of the welded wire fence that I used to have dividing up the permanent runs. I simply bended it into a third, making a rectangle minus one side, and I just bent along the sections, leaving 3 spacings on each side and the top. It made it easy. Though the lines on the wire itself make an easy guide for folding. If I was going to change it again, one thing I would probably do is make this have a bottom, at least at the top. I think that's where they want to dig the most, and having a bottom will prevent that digging in the pathway and prevent them escaping. One thing I liked about these shorter sections is you can allow the tunnel to snake along. With a long tunnel, it's pretty rigid. You can't bend it so easily, but with a bunch of little sections, you can easily orientate them different ways to bend around curves, which makes it easy for me because the runs aren't perfectly lined up with the access to the main tunnels, so a little curving's necessary. I'm happy with the results though. It's good, it's proof of concept. And even though it's tight in here for a limited amount of space, so be it. Now, what I'm gonna do is move them over to another run here, which I'll show you in a second. This is where they're heading next. I know before I said it was ryegrass. It's not, that's an error, it's oats. So they'll be coming in here to clear out the oats. I'm gonna move them over probably tomorrow. And this is a long run. This is twice the length of the one that you just saw. They'll probably be in this one for a week, maybe even 2 weeks. I'm just trying to time it to allow myself to do other projects while they're in here. But this is the forage they'll be taking on next to clear it out so I can move on, do some other things with this pathway. Thanks for watching this one. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.